I will officially sink to the background. Randi?
Thank you so much, Vince, and I appreciate you sticking that out for 2 hours. That was fantastic. And thank you to our previous presenters. I feel like we've gotten a lot of fantastic information. And this portion of our webinar is really dedicated to helping our livestock, helping our dairymen, our beef cattle producers, anyone with livestock, and how we can get resources for water or reduce some of our water use. So as been said, my name is Randi Black. I am the dairy advisor for UC Cooperative Extension, and I work in Sonoma, Marin, and Mendocino counties. We are recording this, so we will have this available to folks to access after this. And as Vince has said, we will also be posting answers to questions. So if you do have any questions throughout this, please use the Q&A function as we have disabled the chat. And we also have Spanish language available for anyone who is interested in Spanish language. So I don't know if we have Daniel available to do that. Karen, if you want to disable interpretation for a moment. We've learned that interpretation has been the hardest part of webinars for all of those planning to host their own. Well, I think Karen is not able to change that. That's okay. Unfortunately, I cannot speak Spanish. But there is at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, there is a small globe, and you can click that interpretation key and then select the language that you would like to hear this webinar in. So if you would like to hear that in Espanol, then you may select that option. So to kick off our livestock and dairy webinar, we are going to begin with Stephanie Larson. Stephanie is our livestock and rangelands advisor at UC Sonoma. So it's your webinar, Steph.
Great. Thank you guys again for holding and hanging with us. This is really cool. So I'm really going to talk about some drought management strategies. I'm probably talking to the choir. You guys know all of this, but it's good to talk about it and maybe look at some options and just kind of strategize to get all together on how we address this very dire situation. I've been in Sonoma County over 35 years, and this is the worst I have ever seen it. And so it's very difficult, and I know it's very difficult for everyone that's listening. So I want to talk about 3 different key strategies. We want to look at range management, we want to look at supplemental feeding, and then obviously our livestock management. So obviously when we look about range management, it's applying grazing strategies. It's looking at how do we minimize impacts to rangeland given that the forage is so depleted, so short. I would say that the forage is about 4 months ahead of where it normally is from what I've seen out in the field right now. So thinking about range management strategies, I want you to go out and actually do some visual assessments and maybe take notes, pictures, different things like that, so that you know the areas that might be of concern. Maybe some species came up. I know there was a lot of fiddleneck that grew this year. So just making mental notes or actual GPS points of where those areas are and thinking about some strategies on how to minimize that and mitigate that as well. So document those areas of bare ground, some thistles, be aware of potential toxicities. There are some nitrogen accumulators that might show up. So if you get a lot of pigweed coming in. Keep in mind, if it's the only green thing, not that the animals really want to eat that, but those plants accumulate nitrites and nitrates, and so you want to make sure to not allow them to graze that. You want to look to banking feed. So depending on where you're at, if you've got some of your best pasture still left and you've saved it, maybe you think about cutting it for windrows or putting those calves on after you wean them and getting that, as much weight off them as you can, or maybe thinking about banking that feed for this fall if you've got the ability to store some feed. So really looking at what's out there, and if it's good quality feed, kind of putting in the bank for later. I would encourage you, if you are a grazer, and put yourself on match.graze, because maybe somebody that's worried about fire and reducing fuels could look you up on match.graze. You just go on that site, you put your profile on, what animals you have to graze, some of the services you might provide, and maybe you can find some extra pasture. Obviously, think about rotating your pastures, keeping the animals moving, and or create a sacrifice pasture. And so what I mean by that is that you've designated as a certain pastures, that's going to be the pasture that's going to be where you're going to leave your animals, and if you're going to feed, you're going to feed on that pasture with the idea that you're going to improve and restore that pasture this fall. So don't make all your grazing lands sacrificed. Let's make some ones that make sense. They're flat. They're not going to have problems with erosion. Maybe you've got some species in there you want to get rid of. So let's just put the cattle on there, the sheep on there, the goats on there, and put a lot of grazing pressure on those lands with the idea that you're going to restore them in the fall. So thinking about supplementing feeds, from livestock, there's not a whole lot we can look at. I know the dairies are more in tune to that and have the ability to store that feed, but keep in mind that there might be some high energy feeds out there. If you could find some corn or soybean hulls or whole cottonseed, I know it's pretty typical for dairies. Also look at liquid supplements. I know a lot of those supplements we can put out in the field, the molasses, that helps those cows, those ruminants, cows, sheep, to digest some of those drier forages. So that might help extend the forage this year. And then any kind of byproducts. I know several of you are looking at almond hulls as a possibility, and maybe looking at other sources of rice straw or rice hay or any of the grass hays. So just really thinking outside the box of things maybe you hadn't normally fed your animals before, and seeing what's available out there. Obviously, livestock management is about maintaining the health of your herd. It's very critical. So when you're thinking about, you want to review the grazing and management strategies. So we want to use the best pastures for our highest maintenance animals. So making sure that you divide those animals up. I know most of you have already done this. You're going to wean your calves and lambs early. It's if you can keep them a little bit longer, maybe ride out some of this market inflections a while longer, be great if you have the good pasture to put them to. Thinking about other culling strategies, thinking about weaning early, obviously culling open animals, doing some preg testing, maybe some old gals that you always keep around for that one more year. Maybe this is the year she's got to go. Hard decisions, but thinking about not trying to destock the real genetic base of your herd, and just trying to minimize the selling issues, because a lot of people are in the same situation. So everybody's selling out. So the whole selling and destocking. If you do choose to sell, you have to sell. I want to point out that there's a IRS code, and there's the numbers, and it applies to sales of excessive abnormal business practices. So if you have to, cull and sell half your herd, and that's not your normal business practice, there are ways to postpone capital gains, and maybe you can use that money to restock the cattle in the next 2 years. So I would encourage you to talk to your tax accountant, to talk to anyone that's maybe done some of this. California cattlemen are very in tune to this. So if you're wanting a little bit more information, or want to talk to me about it more, just keeping this in mind, that you want to make sure that you aren't dinged for your capital gains from selling your cattle because of a drought. So obviously you want to combine all three of those, but again, you guys, we can't feed out of a drought. So let's think of some short and long-term strategies. That being short term, I want you just to kind of really think about what kind of operation you have. Is if this drought is kind of the new norm, how do I mitigate through that? Am I grazing too many animals? Do I need to find more land? Different strategies, maybe more grazing rotation. So look at grazing opportunities, strategies, working with folks to collaborate on water storage and or hauling issues in this short term, kind of working together to reduce the cost of hauling. Again, like I mentioned, explore those local byproducts and establishing monitoring sites so that you can know where those bare ground is. You can kind of observe any kind of other non-native species coming in that you don't want that are reducing the forage quality. So plan for next month, next year, in the future. Long-term strategies, like I mentioned, you might have some sacrifice pastures, some areas that are going to need some restoration. So reseed this fall, take advantage of the rains when they come. You want to look at increasing the water storage. So talking about, that's above ground and in the ground. So maybe looking at, we mentioned ponds, water storage above ground, some new watering systems, but also the whole idea about, I mentioned soil health and water retention. So how do we increase the fertility, the organic matter in our soil, making it healthier, moving to a more perennial system that will extend the growing season, that will extend the water capture, this carbon sequestration. You can use that from a standpoint of reducing your feed cost, improving your animal health, use it in a marketing thing, and applying for some of those practices. Their cost share is available. So think about those, start planning. And again, how do we measure drought? We want you to think about, ongoing, think about some of the tools that have already been mentioned. So the impact, the comparison of past drought, and then start collecting photos and short videos to show evidence that this is happening. Especially if you're in organic production, you want to be able to document the impacts that you're receiving now, and that'll help you when you fill out your applications through FSA and NRCS. You can do this, document it, tell your story. We need to let the public know that this is a problem, in a sense that public and policymakers need to hear it. So maybe they could think about opening more grazing lands, increasing opportunities for our livestock and dairy producers, reducing permit issues as far as water storage, et cetera, et cetera. So really get out there and document that story, tell your story. And with that, I'm available. I've made several farm calls looking out just to help folks. I will definitely be helping people apply for some of the fundings that has been mentioned earlier. And we're going to have another program in June to have more, on the ground activities in what do we do now kind of thing. And so with that, I'll look forward to any questions you might have. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I am going to actually present next. And I'm going to talk about some things that we can do now on farm to really improve water use efficiency, particularly when we're at this point where can we even get water to give to our cows to drink? So one, maybe it's common sense, but something we still really need to stop and think about is maintenance of our water troughs. So we should be out looking at water troughs every day, monitoring for leakage, because if these things are leaking, that's water that our cows can't drink. That's water that we can't use in our parlors or elsewhere. So really making sure that we're not losing water unnecessarily through our trough systems. Also, if we have troughs that are pretty far out that we don't often use, it might be best to just turn those off for now. That's just opening those troughs up for evaporation. So we're again losing water that we don't necessarily want to lose. Also keeping them clean. So if we allow a lot of algae to grow in these, our cows aren't going to drink from them. And so we want to keep them clean so we keep our cows drinking, because as they drink water, that will cool them, and it'll also make sure that they're using that water efficiently to produce milk and meat. It might also be useful to attach a water meter to our troughs just so we can see, is there all of a sudden uptick in water usage, so that we can hit those issues quickly. And also considering shade. So here's a graph to show just how shade can actually impact water temperature of our troughs. cows prefer to drink water from troughs that are about 68 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're actually okay to drink water that's been fairly warm. But we can see that if we provide shade, so that's these white bars, it keeps that temperature lower than if we increase the temperature by not allowing shade to be on our troughs. So this will just help, again, get those cows to drink water and to use it efficiently, so that we're utilizing our water to the best for what we're actually trying to make, which is meat and milk, and not just utilizing it unnecessarily. Also, I don't know that anyone's doing this, but we might have that thought of maybe if we add water to the feed, we can increase the water that cows are getting through the feed. But this is actually not a great idea, because we can actually increase sorting if we're feeding them a total mixed ration or a TMR. It'll reduce their dry matter intake in whole, and we of course don't want that because it's very important for meat and milk production. And it actually increases the temperature of the feed if it's in the lane over time. So another thing that will keep cows from eating as much as we would like, and is just a negative impact of adding water. So I would highly recommend that we do not add water to our total mixed rations. Cow cooling is something that we don't often see here because we have the luxury of coastal breezes. But hot cows drink more water and they produce less milk and meat. So if we're able to cool them, even if it's during those peak heat times of the day, we can see a good benefit of cows drinking less water to dissipate heat and drinking water for the actual production of milk and meat. And as an example, this is the temperature humidity index. So on the right side of the left graph is the temperature in Fahrenheit or Celsius, and on the top is relative humidity. So I just used yesterday as an example. It was about 90 degrees outside, 20% relative humidity. So our temperature humidity index was about 77. And then if we look at that, we can note that cows are drinking probably 10 liters per day more each, just to deal with that increase in temperature humidity index. So again, keeping our cows cool are going to make sure that we're not drinking water just for heat dissipation, but to make meat and milk. Another impact of the temperature humidity index, and sorry, this is a little bit of an obnoxious graph, but the bulk tank or the bacteria count of milk and somatic cell score, as the temperature humidity index increases, those also increase. So we're going to have some issues with udder health and with mastitis. And we're also going to see a decrease in protein, fat, and lactose content as temperature humidity index increases. And that's of course what we get paid on. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our cows cool. Also, parlor use is probably one of the largest ways that we're using water. So if we limit our use of water between groups coming into the milking parlor, let's scrape that manure first and then flush it with the hose to get it clean. Also working with equipment representatives to determine, can we use less water to clean the bulk tank and our milking equipment? And again, another great place to install water meters to see if we're using more water than we should. We might be interested in drying cows off early, but we need to make sure we do this with the cow's welfare in mind. If cows are producing less than 30 pounds of milk per day, it is okay to go ahead and dry those cows off abruptly as we normally would, but we need to make sure that we monitor their body condition during that dry period so we don't have cows calving in that are over conditioned. If they are high producing, so over 30 pounds per day, it's important to put them on a low nutrient density diet or a high forage diet to make sure that we can get their milk production down to less than 30 and then dry them off. You can also switch to once daily milking, but let's be sure that we're keeping those teats clean and dry, because this could create an issue with mastitis if we're not being very careful here. Culling is another thing that we can look at. If cows aren't being bred in a certain number of services, maybe that means that it's time for that cow to leave our herd. Common number is 3 services for that animal. Another way to look at it is let's limit the number of days open that cows are allowed to stay in the herd. So 150 is a pretty good number that we can use for some good culling decisions. If we have cows that are what we call luxury water drinkers, so they go to the water, they're playing, they're splashing, another group that we can consider culling. And then our low producing cows. Also, if they're not producing a lot of milk, then we want to remove them from our herd before we are removing our early and mid lactation cows, because those are the cows who are actually making money for us right now. As Stephanie said, though, we really need to make sure we do these culling decisions with our genetic goals in mind. We don't want to get rid of cows who we've worked to get good genetics for. And we also want to make sure that we're not getting rid of just all of our old cows, because some of those are our actual, like, most profitable cows. So we don't want to be left with a herd of all first lactation heifers who aren't making as much money as some of those second, third, and fourth lactation cows. For our calves and heifers, Stephanie also mentioned weaning calves early. If our calves are 3 to 4 months old and about 300 pounds, then we can go ahead and wean those early, because a lactating cow is going to drink more water than a dry cow. So we want to make sure that these calves have access to excellent nutrition. So if we're not able to provide that, then that might be a barrier for early weaning, but it is still an option if we do have the ability to feed them a good high quality nutrition to support their growth and development. And I know this might not be an option for everyone, but if we can move our dairy heifers off site somewhere that we do have access to water, then that's another option to have fewer animals that need drinking water in our area. So if you have any questions or you want to talk about some other things more, please feel free to contact me. Here's my email and my phone, and that will also be available for those later after this webinar. So thank you. And next on our docket, we are going to be joined by Johanna Good. She is with the Marin Organic Certifying Agency. Marin Organic Certified Agriculture, and she's going to talk about those folks who are interested in getting a variance for the pasture rule. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen, Johanna.
Everyone, can you see that?
We absolutely can. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. That was a great presentation. Hi, everyone. My name is Johanna Good, and as Randy said, I work for the Marin County Department of Agriculture, and we are also an organic certification agency called MOCA. My coworker, Raul Wirtz, is also here to help answer questions a little bit later. This topic is very specific to organic ruminant livestock operations who feel they may not be able to meet certain parts of the organic regulations due to drought this year, and who may want to apply for a temporary variance under the USDA National Organic Program regulations. So my hope today is to share as much information as I can about temporary variances, how they work, and what each entity's role is. I will cover when a temporary variance may be needed, how to apply for one, if a variance is granted, how to remain in compliance, and what actions to take and when. First, the regulations. If you are considering applying for a temporary variance, do your best to understand the process before you begin by reviewing the National Organic Program or NOP regulations related to temporary variances. They're easy to find on the National Organic Program website. A common misconception about temporary variances is that your organic certifier can grant a variance to you. You will need to work with your certifier, but certifiers do not grant temporary variances. It's the NOP or the National Organic Program that makes a determination to approve or deny variances that are submitted by your certifier. And we will keep going over this several times, how the process works. Variances are actually quite rare. There are currently only 3 in effect nationwide. 2 are for research purposes, and the other is for drought in Petaluma. I apologize for this wall of text. That is not pretty to look at, but the regulations are sort of the basis for all of this, and it's important to understand what's in the regulation. So this is the NOP regulation that covers temporary variances, and the important parts of it are highlighted in red if you just want to focus on those. Part A, I am going to go through this, not totally in depth, but just sort of list out the parts A, B, C, D, and E and what they mean. So Part A lists the code sections the temporary variances can be requested for. And then parts 1, 2, and 3 under A are the reasons why a temporary variance may be established. So what's important here up at the top, under Part A in red, 205.236 through 205.240 are parts of the regulations in which a temporary variance could be requested for. And those are what are referred to as the pasture rule, those particular regulations. And then the other important thing here is the reason why a temporary variance may be established. And again, what's highlighted is damage caused by drought. There are other reasons, but we will focus on drought. Part B lists who can make a recommendation, not grant a temporary variance, but make a recommendation for a temporary variance. There are only 2 entities who can do that. The first is a state organic program such as CDFA, and the second is an organic certification agency who may recommend in writing to the National Organic Program that a temporary variance from a specific standard or code section of the regulation based on the reasons listed above in Part A. Part C states that if the National Organic Program decides to establish a temporary variance, they will notify the certifier in writing. The variance will be applicable to specific operations and state the specific period of time it will remain in effect. And this is why it is called a temporary variance. It will state the specific period of time that it's in effect. Part D states that the certifier must then notice each operation to which the temporary variance applies. And Part E states a variance will not be granted for any practice, material, or procedure prohibited under Code Section 205.105. And that particular section, 205.105, talks about what is allowed and what is not allowed in organic production. And something that's not allowed is feeding non-organic feed to organic livestock. That will never be allowed even under a temporary variance. So just to recap this wall of text here, the certified producer sends a request for a temporary variance and any supporting documentation to the certifier. The certifier makes a recommendation to the National Organic Program that a temporary variance be established on behalf of a certified organic operation for a specific part of the regulation for a specific reason for a specific period of time. So more regulation, but it has to, it's the basis for the whole thing. So these are the code sections often referred to as the pasture rule, and that explain the requirements for ruminant animals to receive at least 30% of their dry matter intake from pasture for at least 120 days during the defined grazing season. And again, the important aspects are highlighted in red. The bottom line here is that we are in a drought, which is affecting the quality of pasture. So it is likely that any variance requested in our area will be for not being able to meet the pasture rule regulations. So this is really the important part for producers, how to request a temporary variance. As I mentioned before, the request must come from the producer to the certifier. The certifier may then recommend the variance to the NOP. This request from the producer to the certifier must be in writing and include justification for the temporary variance. Why do you need it? And also include the scope, livestock, the duration, most likely the 2021 grazing season, and supporting documents and/or records. It should also include the sections of the regulation you are requesting a variance from. As we just went over, variance can only be requested for specific parts of the regulation. And again, it would be from the pasture rule. If the variance were to be granted, the producer must maintain records on procedures and practices impacted by the variance. What does that mean? An example would be documenting the days on pasture you can get even during the drought, and documenting what you are feeding per the variance. Essentially, your operation must remain auditable. Applying for a variance and having a variance granted to you is not a complete exemption from the pasture rule. So once a variance is submitted, the NOP will inform the certifier of the result, who will then inform the producer. If the request is denied, a notice of denial will be issued and will include the reasons for the denial. And this is something that's also important. The NOP will not grant a temporary variance retroactively. So if your defined grazing season, let's say, starts January 15th and goes to June 15th, and on June 16th, you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't make it. I didn't get 120 days and I didn't get 30%, an average of 30% from pasture for those days. I think I'll apply for a temporary variance. It's not going to work. The NOP has flat out said that they will not grant a temporary variance retroactively. So if you are feeling like you're not going to be able to meet the pastoral regulations, then I would suggest talking to your certifier right away. As I mentioned on the last slide, your request for a temporary variance must include substantiating documentation justifying the need. How is the drought affecting your ability to meet the pasture rule this year? How does this year compare to previous years? Your letter should be as specific as possible, stating the current count of days on pasture, the dry matter intake from pasture for all classes of livestock, and your estimation of the number of days in pasture DMI you can make for this grazing season. This slide just shows some examples of supporting documentation to consider including in your request. And again, your certifier does not prepare the request to the NOP. They merely recommend the request, your request, to the National Organic Program. So there are some things that a temporary variance cannot be granted for. And again, any practice or material prohibited in 205-105, I mentioned this previously. This is the code section that lists what is and what is not allowed in organic production. And I just want to emphasize one more time that feeding non-organic feed, it will never be allowed. And also that temporary variances are, again, for a specified period of time. So most likely this year, any temporary variance that is approved will be for the 2021 pasture season, grazing season, whatever you want to call it. So here's some examples of what temporary variances look like. These are from last year, taken from the NOP website. And in the first example, this is what was approved by the NOP. The dry matter intake was reduced to 20% as opposed to 30, and the pasture days were reduced to 90 instead of 120. And in the second example, the DMI remains at 30%, but the pasture days were reduced to 100 days. More resources. The NOP has published a guidance document with instructions on what to do and the role of each entity. And I can't emphasize enough to work with your certifier, ask them questions, find out what you need to do. Certification agencies are not allowed to advise or consult, but we do really want to help. So work with your certifier. If there are any questions, they'll be held to the end of the livestock session. And we really appreciate your time. My contact information is here. My coworker Raul's contact information is also here. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Next, we're going to have Susan Haydon with Sonoma Water present. Susan, if you want to share. Oh, we can't hear you, Susan. But it doesn't look like you're muted. We still can't quite hear you. Why don't we move to Stefan Parnay and we'll let Susan work out her microphone and you can go after Stefan, Susan.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. So this is specifically for Marin County in regards to water accessibility. And first, I just want to mention North Marin Water District and also the Marin Municipal Water District have been super partners in this whole drought crisis and are very supportive of agriculture and understand its importance. And so I'll start with the North Marin Water District. There have been specific hydrants that have been identified based on need and location. There is a hydrant that is located along San Antonio Road. It's potable water. There has been a meter installed and ranchers are currently using that now. And we did get permission from the North Marin Water District for ranchers to have access to Stafford Lake, and that is raw water. There is a meter or there is a hydrant at the base of the dam at Stafford Lake. Currently, no meter has been installed because there has not been a need yet. But if that need arises, we can get work with North Marin Water District to get a meter installed within a couple days. And lastly, for North Marin Water District is the Point Reyes service area. So if you are an ag producer that is basically has their land and is ranching within the Point Reyes service area, you should have access to potable water there. So if for some reason you don't, or your ranch is based on not or just on collection on surface water and you have run out, there is the potential. I can work with North Marin Water District to get access to a hydrant within the Point Reyes service area. If you are located outside of the service area of Point Reyes, then you would not have any ability to get water from that service area. And in regards to Marin Municipal Water District, we got approval from the board of the water district to allow ranchers access to a hydrant below Nicasio Reservoir. This is also for raw water. And while I'm thinking about it, very important that you know what kind of water you need or you must have, because raw water is untreated. And it's just like one of a stock pond or a reservoir that ranchers use. And then potable water obviously has a lot more uses as far as ranching operation. So with Nicasio Reservoir, there is a meter that has been installed on a hydrant below the dam. Ranchers are going to begin using that actually this week. The one issue is that it's only for those ranchers that are in the immediate area within the Nicasio Valley. And so if you're outside of that area, then unfortunately you would not have access to that water source. In regards to the town of Tamales, I did do some research there, and unfortunately there's no water source available in the Tamales area. And for those of you that live in the Tamales, Two Rock area, you know very well that it is a very dry area. And so unfortunately, many ranchers, especially dairies, are having to haul water if they're living ranching in that area. And then there is some communication with Sonoma County and Marin County with Congressman Huffman's office in regards to the Coast Guard Training Center. And but that's also, I think, going to be difficult, challenging, but there's definitely talks going on to see if there is. I'm not sure if they have a well on site or if that could be a potential water source, but conversations are going on there as well. And so, yes, as far as state and federal support, we are, all of our partners, we're working together to try and get additional support for our ranchers within Sonoma and Marin. And hopefully in the next few months, we'll have, some idea of what that's going to look like. We're going to continue to provide information to the right people to get, hopefully get what we need. So that's my last slide, Randi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And I do believe that Susan, you are ready now. Maybe. Still no. Well, while you're doing that, we can go ahead and start because you'll be our last presenter, and we'll just throw in some questions, some Q&A while you're working on your microphone. Stephanie, you answered a question in the Q&A, and I actually would just, if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and answer that. The question was, could you share more information about practices that you mentioned that can build soil, water holding capacity, and fertility on pasture and rangeland?
Great, absolutely. So the whole idea is increasing the soil health of the land. And so you can do that by your grazing management. You can do it by adding things like compost. Compost adds organic matter back into the soil. It helps you to build some carbon into the soil. And then with that, you can start to plant different suite of species. So you can plant grasses and clovers. And we've been looking at some of the tap-rooted like radishes and large leaf plantains. And that helps open up the soil profile so that when the rain does come, you're capturing as much of the rain as you can and you're keeping it in the soil profile, and it gets the roots to go down deeper, and it expands your forage, it extends your grazing season, and it just makes the soil healthier. And so in areas that make sense, flat, good quality soil, you can look at seeding and adding either fertilizer or in this case, compost will help.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. So this was a question that was submitted earlier, and I don't know if Stefan or Susan might be able to speak to this, but I think this is a concern for a lot of folks is, do you foresee any legal issues that might come from the drought from the community that it's affecting? Do you see any folks that might need to prepare for the fact that there could be issues with our agricultural producers using some of this water?
Yeah, I can start with that. So yeah, I think the key is really going to be able to ensure that the water sources that ranchers are using, have been approved. That's obviously very critical. And I know, for example, in Petaluma, there's a number of ranchers that have permits legally to get water from some hydrants. And I know there's been concern from the community about that. And I think that's a story we need to tell about agriculture and how critical it is. And so if there's any doubt about the source of water, where you're getting it from, you should definitely just make absolute certain that it is a legal source, because these kinds of issues are going to arise and things are going to get a lot worse, unfortunately, over the next several months.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I think that's such an important answer and question. Susan, were you able to connect to audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Fantastic. Fantastic. Awesome. So if you want to share your slide for your presentation.
I will do that. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay. Again, Susan Haydon. I'm
Oh,
a conservation
didn't-
planner. Can you hear
We
me?
don't actually see it. We don't see the slide.
Don't see the slide.
If you want though, I can just share it for you since I do have a copy.
Well, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, Randy.
Of course.
Oh, goodness.
There we go.
Okay, great. So I'm a conservation planner with Sonoma Water and proud to partner with UC and many organizations in the region to address our natural resource concerns and build resiliency for the future. This, of course, is not our first drought. However, as we all know, we are at historic lows in reservoir levels and rainfall totals. And our region, as we all know, is characterized by a vibrant ag industry, a strong history of conservation and land stewardship. And frankly, we're innovators and leaders in sustainable practices. But here again, we're challenged by a severe drought, and especially hard hitting to our ag producers. So I've been asked to share some information on Sonoma County and water availability for ag. And before I share what I know, I'd like to make the caveat that Sonoma Water is not a provider of ag. We're a wholesaler and retailer of potable drinking water, serving over 600,000 customers in Sonoma and Marin counties. And this naturally filtered water is harnessed from the Russian River and delivered to cities and other customers through what we call our water transmission system. So rural residences and agriculture are primarily reliant on, as we know, wells and some surface water capture. They're not part of this developed water systems that are managed by agencies and entities. So I think a first message is there's no one agency in Sonoma County that manages the entire water supply. However, all agencies, as we've been hearing, are calling for water conservation. So, and the county and Sonoma Water and the cities, our water contractors and our water districts, all are using different approaches. So I'll provide some information on water sources. So water for ag is currently being supplied through municipal wells through basically two delivery methods. One, ranchers are contracting with private water haulers who truck the water to them, and their sources are municipal wells, many of them. And then the second method is the ranch operations drive to these hydrants or wells to fill up and are sold water via a rented meter or another mechanism. So each city operates its own program. And I have information on a few cities, and I'll run through those now. So starting with the city of Petaluma, city has a water source off McDowell Boulevard, and it rents its meters and is limited to local area ag producers. The city of Santa Rosa is providing potable water via hydrants, and any Santa Rosa resident may apply for a permit to have a construction meter, and this includes ag producers. There's a set fee plus a deposit, and then a monthly fee. City of Santa Rosa also has a hydrant with potable water at 35 Stony Point Road. This supply can be technically used by those outside the city limits, but you must use your own water truck and incur all costs of transport. The city of Santa Rosa issues these permits. They're typically good for 1 year, and the permit cost is $15. For the city of Sebastopol, they do have one public water pumping station, but it's closed to new accounts due to the drought. So they're not taking any new customers. So in addition to partnering with our community to identify solutions to address our current drought emergency, Sonoma Water is actively collaborating with our partners to seek long-term measures to build resiliency for the future. And I'll share 4 actions that we're working on right now. So first one is we're working very closely with Director Rabbit, the board, the ag community, Farm Bureau, UC Cooperative Extension, Ag Commissioner, and NRCS. And we're working to identify a source of water that we can bring online. Second, we're working with our grape grower partners on water conservation and surface water storage options, and envisioning pilot programs to manage surface and groundwaters effectively. Thirdly, you've heard from NRCS. We're working with NRCS to learn more about their very successful wildlife-friendly pond restoration program led by NRCS and the RCDs in Alameda and Contra Costa County. This program could potentially be replicated here to assist with improving water for livestock and wildlife through restoration of existing livestock ponds, such as removing sediment, spillway repair, installing tanks and troughs, and potentially developing other sources of water. They have 15 years of success, and they have built a strong program. They have streamlined the permit process, which is one of the main barriers that can hinder this type of work. So that's a program that we're learning more about. And then lastly, we're continuing water conservation and water use efficiency efforts. And as Stefan mentioned, also leveraging state and federal dollars to assist in long-term water security and building resilience of this precious and vital water supply. So thanks so much for your attention, and thank you, UC, for your partnership and opportunity to join today.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that information, and I'm sure others do appreciate it as well, because it is really important, particularly when we're talking about getting drinking water for our cattle and other livestock. I will note we did have a question that was talking about actions that farmers and rangers can take that will help to build resilience. And I just want to plug in that we're going to have a future webinar on June 29th looking at just that and how we can build resilience. So right now is what can we do now? And we're going to talk about what we can do later at that webinar. Stephanie, you did get a follow-up question to your previous one, and it was, what native plants would you recommend using to achieve the soil benefits that you mentioned?
Well, I have to always preface this by saying I would ask you what your goals are. So if your goals are to have more native species, then you could look at what species make sense for your area, for your soil. You know, I need to know where you're located. You could have native grasses. There are some native forbs, but they're not the most forage producing plants. And so we're looking at, you know, if you're looking at forage and carbon, we're probably looking at more introduced perennial species. But again, it would be something, if you want to email me, it's a good offline topic as far as I'd ask, well, what are your goals? And then I could help you to select what species might work best for your area. It's not like you can just go out and plant whatever species you like. We have to see if it'll grow in that area.
Thank you, Stephanie. This might be a good question for perhaps Stefan or Susan. We had someone ask previously, will there be priorities for water allocations for existing operations versus new operations? Is there going to be any priority for those allocations?
I think those are the conversations that we'll need to have and figure out what makes sense, and then make some decisions based on that. I'm not sure if Susan has any additional information to add on that.
No, I concur with your response. This is something we'll need to discuss. Absolutely. The priority right now is existing emergency, short-term, and keeping our livestock producers with some water.
Agreed. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. We did have a question about access to municipal or recycled water. I think you touched on that a little bit, Stefan, with the raw water, maybe not with recycled water, but do you guys have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I can just mention, yeah, that recycled water is being looked at right now. There was actually Assembly Member Mark Levine had a bill back in 2014 requesting a group get together to analyze recycled water, and if it would could be used in agricultural areas and for agricultural operators. And there's still work being done on that. David Lewis with UC Cooperative Extension is doing some research on that. And actually, we have a meeting coming up to talk a little bit more about that. But I believe recycled water definitely has a very important place, and there are some limitations on its use. I think one of them will be that for livestock, it would not be allowed to be used for lactating cows. But besides that, I think there is some options there that could really help support the agricultural industry, and especially drought resiliency into the future.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, well, I do believe that we are kind of at the end of our webinar. I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Hopefully you guys got something out of this that you can use now and can really improve your ability to get through this drought. And as I mentioned before, we will have another webinar on June 29th, really talking about resiliency and how we can move forward and be better prepared for the next drought that we will inevitably have. We are recording this lecture in English, and hopefully Spanish is recording. And hopefully we'll be able to put those online for you guys to access. And then we are hoping to get any questions that we didn't answer here answered, and we will distribute those to you guys after this online. Stefan, you had something?
Real quick, just a reminder, I didn't get mentioned, there's drought resources pages for all of our partners. So please look online for that. That's really critical. So FSA, our department, Sonoma County partners as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Vince, do you have any last comments, or shall we send everyone off?
I think we're there. I just appreciate everybody coming out, all the presenters who came in through the 3 hours, our interpreters who provided assistance on the Spanish language channel. Really appreciate that as well. And following today, in addition to the questions that Randi mentioned that will go out with answers, we will have lists of the presenters, their contact information, and as Stefan pointed out, some of those online resources that you can use later on to just dig in deeper to all of these topics.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we will see you on June 29th.
Bye everyone.
Goodbye.